Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel where we provide an alternative view to the common narrative. There was an African summit held in St Petersburg on the 27th and 28th of July. So can you tell us a little bit about what happened there and what was discussed?
Yes, it was a summit for
Mm,
between Russia and who invited a number of African countries, of which,
including South Africa.
yeah, well,
We're on
there
the
was,
map.
yeah,
We're finally on the map.
but about 17. Well, there is some discussion about in the Western media about the poor attendance, but that you can call basically fake news. About 17 countries have sent presidents of 17
Mm,
countries have appeared on this meeting, and the rest were either very high level politicians or vice presidents or second in command or stuff like that. So the attendance was quite well. It was about 49 countries that did attend. So it was a successful meeting, in my opinion. A number of things were discussed, of which basically Russia and try to basically make agreements with African countries. And they did sign a document at the end of the meeting, which where Africa and Russia will get more involved into each other. Russia will then supply certain goods like agricultural equipment, some medical equipment, some energy products, and so on. So, but the most thing important actually is that we're going back to the grain deal.
mm.
Grain is food. Food is important for Africa. So, in terms of the supply of grain to Africa, Putin promised them some free grain.
Is it true that Putin decided to basically remove the date and supply them free grain?
Yeah, so while they're going to supply some grain for free,
Mm,
they also, but some of them will be sold.
mm,
Then they will also supply fertilizer, and they were discussing the grain deal. And basically, Ukraine doesn't deliver such a big part to the world market in terms of food.
mm.
According to Putin, if I remember correctly, and you know my numbers are not always that accurately, I think Ukraine supplies about 4 to 6% of the world market, where Russia at this stage supplies about 20% to Africa.
Wow,
So that's
business is
much more bigger
booming.
influence in terms of that. And in spite of all the sanctions against Russia, Russia still is mobilizing ships and insurance and so on to service Africa. But one must also type of a little bit remember that Africa has actually two types of cultures. There's the African below the Sahara, and then there's the African above the Sahara.
That's more Arabic.
Yeah, which is more Arabic.
Mm,
And there was even a recent talk that Egypt was encouraging Russia to do all trades, future trades, and payments into rubles and
mm.
move away from the US dollar.
That's good for Africa.
Yeah, and I think Nigeria and
Kenya?
yeah, I think Kenya as well.
Mm,
And there were some countries that are also indicating that they want to move away from
from
the
the dollar.
dollar
Yeah.
and focus more on domestic local currencies exchanges, like whatever they have against the Russian ruble, and do basically trade so they can get away from the SWIFT system and the influence that America has on the SWIFT system. So they can't boycott them and can't starve them and can't penalize them by
So,
using the dollar as a weapon system.
so evade colonization, basically.
Yeah, well, you can say that, yes.
Mm. So, Africa made a peace proposal between Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah. See,
What?
it's
Go
again
ahead.
an African initiative.
Mm,
South Africa tries to play a big role in African itself, in the African Union, and basically as a union, they would like to resolve the conflict because at the end of the day, the conflict doesn't benefit anybody. and they are experiencing high energy prices, high food prices, which was partially caused by the war. The rest was basically inflation caused by money printing in the Western world, which also has a huge influence on developing countries like Africa. So the people that have the worst side effects of the money printing, irresponsible money printing in the West, are basically the poor countries, and that is Africa. So in that respect, we had peace proposals by India, by China, by Brazil, and now by Africa. And now, naturally, all of them are reasonable proposals, but Zelensky and America don't think like that.
Of course.
They basically outright refuse these things, which is going to be for their own detriment, because at the end of the day, it will be a political settlement, and it won't be in favor of Ukraine. So Putin actually indicated, I think 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, that he was considering the African proposal, and he would listen to the guys. And the African delegation is gonna do some more work trying to get this peace agreement through.
So why Africa? Why is Africa so important?
Well, Africa is basically the richest continent in the world.
In terms of resources.
In terms of resources and capability, and not only minerals, but agricultural, human resource, if you want to talk about that. So they are rich, but they are the poorest in the world in terms of physically money.
Modern
And this has
slavery.
been caused mostly by the old physical colonization, where they were controlled and exploited by Western countries like Britain, France, Holland, and so on, and Portugal, and Spain, and so on. But when the sort of slave trade and the colonization were physically terminated, another form came up, and that was financially colonization. We have talked about that. It is basically where the African countries are lent money to such an extent that they are basically in a debt trap because of all the rules and special conditions that the World Bank and IMF have done. And the World Bank and IMF were created by America to control other countries, because if you control the debt, you control the country.
You can't get out of it.
And that is basically what happened in Africa. Now, Africa is not a kosher country. They do have a lot of corruption, self-interest, tribal leaders. Wars have been fought on the continent, civil wars, even where the Russians were involved, the Soviet Union. But that's about it at this stage. But one has to look at it a little bit more globally. The point here is that China, we have basically two types of world we developed. The old Western world, which is America, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan, who always controlled the world. And now you have the development of a multipolarity. Out of a multipolarity world, it includes Africa and South America and Central Asia and East Asia and Asia and North Asia, and all these other countries.
The ones you never hear about.
Yeah, and those are the forms about 2/3 of the rest of the world. And so they're splitting off. So from a point of a multipolarity, Africa is very important. And with South Africa at the point of the continent and seen as a gateway to Africa, and being as a part of the BRICS countries, they form an important part of Africa. In the same way, what we're talking about as Africa itself, we can talk about South America, because they are similar type of developments. But on the other hand, is China has been developing as a huge economic manufacturing bloc, and it has a lot of products to sell and services to sell. And who's it going to sell it to? So China tried to enter the African market, but Africa is poor. So first you have to do is you have to create a client base for their products. And for being a client, to create a client, in Africa, you have to alleviate its poverty of the citizens. And you also have to build infrastructure, because it is a rough, underdeveloped nations that are so the infrastructure is fairly important And that is what China has done. Now, I know it's a typical story from the West that China tries to put African countries into a debt trap, but it is not like that. It's quite the opposite. It's not the Western nations that put them on a debt trap. There have been now multiple cases where China has actually, where the client country said, but listen here, we can't pay you back and so on. The China said, but okay, let's write off this the debt money. Something you will not get in the IMF or the World Bank or the Western bank system. So China has done a lot in developing Africa. Yes, there is some unhappiness about some of the things that China does, but one has to really look at that with its either once-off or local stuff, or just personalities that clash and are not in agreement. But in overall, China has done a lot of that. And because China wants to create a market. If the Western world, as we all believe, is going to collapse in terms of economic, then the living standard is going to fall. And if the living standards will fall, they won't be able to purchase Chinese products. And even if, as the going goes, war between the West and China, and again, what is China going to do with its economy and products? So they are actually looking for different markets. And Africa is one of the markets. Middle East, not that much because they don't have not that many people. But Middle Asia, like Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, Indonesia, and so on. And then you have the South American countries. So those are all the markets that China is looking for. And that is why Africa, one of the continents, is important. And then we also have the so-called, like I said, the northern part of Africa. The Egypt, Libya, Morocco, and the western side, western bulge of countries all around African.
So where exactly? Tell us a little bit more about where South Africa fits into this whole thing.
Well, South Africa is part of the BRICS countries, and well, it was the BRICS countries. I think was established about 2004, so that's a long time ago, and things didn't develop that fast. The BRICS group is now becoming a lot more prominent in the last couple of years because of the political development in the world, and this. We are talking about a multipolarity world now, but I'm sure it was on the cards for a long time. If it was like a strategy by the bigger countries like Russia and China. So if this happened, then that would do. If that would happen, then that. And while conditions, actions taken by the West has necessitated that the BRICS become a lot more prominent. So South Africa being the fifth member, does play a big role. South Africa is also the most advanced economy in Africa. We have a good infrastructure. Well, we're supposed to have. But we have also connections in terms of railway connections and road networks to the rest of Africa, especially the southern piece, like Zimbabwe, Zambia, Angola, DRC, Tanzania. There's a lot of other migrant workers like from Kenya, from Malawi, and Rhodesia coming and work for us. So we do have good relations. We have also an economic zone agreement where we have, I don't know, duty, I don't know, import and export duties type of thing, agreement. So we can export a lot of things to the rest of Africa, and we have good ports.
What about sorry. I never know when to
Yeah. So, but we have a little bit of a problem in terms of that. And actually, my friend in Panama actually made me aware of that. But I did see it before, and that is the effect of the whites in South Africa.
I was going to ask about now the politics in South Africa. How does that affect
Yeah, which is
Africa and
now,
South
now
Africa as a
firstly,
whole?
not me, neither you are big ANC supporters, because the ANC are making a lot of nonsense and so on.
Mm,
But in this case, I hope that the ANC takes the opportunity as a major BRICS member to exploit that, get South Africa developed, and get the benefit of international trade. And also, South Africa is already negotiating for trade in South African rand versus the yuan and ruble. So they're also working already on that to sidestep the SWIFT system.
mm,
So that's from the one side. But we have conservative whites and we have liberal whites.
yeah.
The conservative whites are the old Boere, the Afrikaans-speaking people, and sometimes most of the Afrikaans people are quite accommodating in terms of the changes necessary for our new government. So we're not sort of nationalists in that respect. I think we have given up a lot of that type of view. We are more adapting, trying to adapt to the new circumstances and earn a living. The Liberal Party, the Liberal side, unfortunately, is the biggest party. That's a Democratic Alliance, DA. And they rule here in Africa. And unfortunately, these guys are pro-Western. They are pro-American. So anything they view Russia in the same sense as the old Soviet Union, the Communist Party. They see China as a bad guy, as a Communist Party. And they just can't get in the head that the world has changed and that circumstances have changed. And they cannot realize how the West have actually is a hypocritic institution where the Western values have been destroyed in every sense since last year, 22, when they started the Ukraine war. I mean, everything was exposed that was supposed to be hidden, all the bad items of the West. And still, you know, the whites, the liberal whites want to support Africa, support America. So that you can't get hold of that. And actually, I want to make a videos and tell these South Africans, hey, you better wake up because world is changing. And the Western world is undergoing huge changes and probably a degradation in living standards and money-wise and riches and wealth. And although most of our export goes to America and Europe itself, especially Europe, that's going to change. And we are at this stage, if you want to make prevention or be conservative, start expanding and looking for markets in China, looking for agreements. One of the things actually that Putin sort of agreed with the African countries and so on is floating nuclear power stations. Now we have in this, we all know we have a load shedding problem, a short of electricity. And there was one of the guys at the Turkish ships, they have gas turbines. And now we wanted to have a 20-year contract with them for burning gas in order, they are floating ships. They're going to be moored here in Saldanha Bay. They're going to use gas to drive the gas turbines on the ships, and then they're going to supply a certain number of megawatts and so on. But the Russians have successfully built floating nuclear power stations, of which they have now used several years in the most northern part of Siberia, basically on the Arctic coast and so on. These nuclear power stations, and they have a good reputation. They have very safe designs. And in my opinion, in any case, is that the Russians are much more advanced in nuclear power generation than any other country in the world, even the French and even the Americans. The Americans still have, like 1960 type of reactors, which are unsafe and which probably has been a little bit optimized and improved. But anyway, they can't really compete with the Russians. I mean, you don't understand it, but the Russians now have developed a technology to burn MOX fuel. Now, MOX fuel is basically used up Ukrainian spent fuel, which we have to bury.
Yeah.
And now the Russians have developed a reactor that can burn those used up cells.
Mm.
And that is a huge, major advancement. So, if South Africa can just get their head past this whole story, and the whites can just get past this anti-Russian old 3 year, they're living in 30 years old past. Oh, by the way, they use big Ukrainian supporters. And if they are Ukrainian supporters, then they don't understand the whole situation in Ukraine and where it comes from. So they are anti-Russian because of the war. Even in our City Hall was highlighted with the Russian flag. So I'm actually, I was voting for them, but I'm thinking of not voting for them in the future.
I see.
But I can get the passes and, chuck the Turkish gas generator floating platform, bring in the Russian nuclear platform. That's going to be a much more beneficial exercise because these can deliver a lot more energy from the platform. Has a good reputation, and the rest of Africa is going to do it. So why not South Africa? So, well, yeah, that's about how Africa can. I wish they would just take the opportunity that they are being given.
So, how did the African states respond to
the summit?
Yeah.
Well, like I said, they have made agreements and they have actually asked Russia. Because it was a Russian summit, but you can do the same with Chinese, to use local currencies. I think Nigeria wants to now trade in yuan, not the Russian ruble, but it doesn't really matter. Yuan is just as well, it's part of the bloc. They're also going to use the BRICS Bank to finance a lot of products or projects, more rather. Russia is going to concentrate on humanitarian efforts and support. And I think I can't believe it because he promised like $13 million for development of health in Africa. $13 million must be a typo. It must be probably about like $130 million or something like that for the health benefit or even more. But there were some zeros missing to improve the health. In fact, by the way, again, my friend in Panama made me attention of that. Just north of South Africa, there in Zimbabwe. Now, Zimbabwe has a terrible history in terms of corruption. There's one party in power for the last 40 years or so, and Mugabe, if you ever heard about him. Well, anyways, Russia and Zimbabwe, who's very poor, have agreed on space technology. And they actually want to send up a satellite for Zimbabwe they call it weather and so on, near orbit measurements, something like that. But it has to do with basically weather forecastings. Then also they now delivered in November, I think they delivered 18 helicopters to Zimbabwe, of which they're supposed to get 32. That was a joint venture between Russian and Zimbabweans. Most of them were actually for medical emergency helicopters, and there were about 4 police helicopters. And also they now sort of signed at this summit, they signed an IT cooperation between the two countries.
Sure.
So Africa basically has been restrained from development. Intentionally by the West, in order to keep them down, keep them an agricultural type of enslavement. Because at the end of the day, Europe doesn't have enough food, and so they need some suppliers to grow their food. And then, they took over the land and the farming, and then they told them African countries what they must farm, and then they exploited them for cheap labor in these farms. And some of the crop is not totally profitable enough and stuff like that. But Europe basically needs it. So they enforce total control over the economy in these countries. And that's why we usually had a lot of civil wars,
Mm.
because naturally people rebel against that.
If only our viewers could properly understand how poor these countries are.
Yeah,
I'll show some
and how the wars have
photos.
affected them, and how they were forced by poverty to destroy the forest and the wildlife and so on. You know, when I was in the army, they showed us a propaganda video, but it was true video footage from Africa. And one of them was in Kenya. Now, Kenya is renowned for the huge wildlife. A lot of documentaries and research are actually done in that area, Serengeti and so on. Now, initially, when they were controlled and everything was kept quiet, and then a rebel group or some other military commander became part of that. And then what they showed us, they would take this 4x4s with a wire in between, two 4x4s. And then they will go basically, the herd was running forward. And then the guys were with the two vehicles and the wire in between next to them. And then they will drive past one and cut off the legs of the bucks. And before you can see it's beautiful, and after that you see only the carcasses laying like that. Then they killed the elephants, and it was terrible actually. And that was, but the people had a need of food, and they thought, all right, now they're in charge and they can do whatever without thinking forward that they have to maintain their innings. And well, it's all has been recovered, luckily. But I won't tell you all the other stories. Some of them are very cruel. But in any case, what we were talking again?
About the I don't know, this thing with the animals completely took me off
Sidetrack me,
guard.
yeah. It's the same
The
thing.
original question was how did this African states
How
respond?
they did respond, yes.
Yeah.
So they are fed up with the West. They have explained it as well. They are fully behind Russia. They do understand Russia's perspective in terms of the conflict.
And we all benefit from it anyway.
Yeah.
But we're stupid. We're shooting ourselves in the foot to not.
It's like the African leaders also have said in terms of the war, when they were pressured by, the Russians went, after they started the war, the Russians sent a lot of higher ranking diplomatic missions to Africa, especially Lavrov and so on. And he was called, he was received, yeah. He was received by open arms and given a red carpet treatment and stuff like that. And then as soon as he departed, then the Americans tried to come in with their diplomatic, and they were either ignored or they were treated no red carpet and stuff like
Good.
that. Basically, they were treated badly.
The way they should.
Yeah, and the Western countries, it's not one country. I mean, Lavrov, I don't know, probably went to 20 countries or more, and they all greeted him as well. It was even in South Africa, when actually there were DA whites.
Yeah.
And even the DA whites are fighting against that Putin comes to South Africa for the BRICS meeting.
Arrest him.
Yeah, they want to arrest him.
Because of the ICC.
So they want to create a war. What idiotic reason.
I don't know how they would ever do that.
Yeah. So, and they had multiple meetings, and like I said, they voluntarily not voluntary, but from their own, said they want to get rid of the dollar and SWIFT payment, and they appreciate what Russia is doing in terms of the grain deal and stuff like that, and they are not prepared, and they were standing a lot of pressure. I mean, if you think about this, what did I say, about 17 presidents, African presidents went there, and the rest were sort of vice presidents, or I don't know, second command, basically I would call them. It shows you that there were, some of the countries were under pressure, diplomatic pressure from the West, but still they went, and they sent their main people. So it shows you that they are openly defying the bullying tactics from the West.
They were also threatened with their own sanctions, and I think, yeah.
But they all said no for the first time ever.
Stand up for
the first time ever they stand up against the West, and they're looking east. So it's a huge movement. It's a huge change, in the world, and it benefits the establishment of a multipolarity world, and they show you also the abandonment of the monopolar world, the West influence of the West and the threats and so
One
on.
world order.
Yeah, basically.
Thank goodness. So we came to the end of our video. We would just like to thank you for watching and put a request in for a like, a subscribe, and to tell your friends. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to listen to our stories.
So until next time, and hopefully you will watch again. Cheers.
Goodbye.